Hello and welcome to the podcast. This is Ron's Amazing Stories. We have stories that should thrill you a little and chill you a little.
It's amazing.
What you'll hear are adventures sent in by you guys, classic stories from the Pulp Mags, and episodes from the golden age of radio. We have special segments like Ghost Stories with Sylvia.
That's amazing.
And These Are Your Stories. So settle in for the next hour and enjoy the show. One more thing. You just might want to prepare yourself to be taken away from today.
That you say?
Hello and welcome to the podcast. Today we're going to explore the fabulous world of the Pulp Magazine. We will have 4 stories that come from that era, but not just any stories. These are some of my favorites. Pulp magazines were popular publications from the late 19th century through the mid-20th century, especially thriving from the 1920s to the 1950s. They were called pulp because they were printed on cheap, low-quality wood paper. So having said that, here is my history of the flimsy, fabulously absurd beginnings of an era. Once upon a time before the internet, television, and even decaf coffee, humanity faced a dire crisis. How to entertain themselves without resorting to conversation. Enter the Pulp Magazine era, a glorious time when stories were as wild as the paper was cheap. The name pulp came from the high-quality wood pulp used to make the magazines. Okay, I'm just kidding. It was the cheapest, most splinter-prone paper imaginable. The kind that disintegrated if you rubbed it the wrong way. But who cared? Readers weren't there for paper integrity. They came for sensational stories featuring hard-boiled detectives, aliens with questionable motives, and dames who could outwit any man provided he was distracted by her strategic use of a feathered hat. Starting in the early 1900s, magazines like Argosy and Amazing Stories burst onto the scene, offering tales of adventure, mystery, and science fiction. Of course, the science was optional, but the fiction was mandatory. Writers were paid per word, and this adopted a strategy known as literary padding. Why say, "The monster roared," when you could say, "The enormous, grotesque, horrifying, slightly moist monster emitted an earth-shaking, eardrum-bursting, neighborhood-annoying roar." That paid a whole lot more. The magazine covers were masterpieces of improbable anatomy. Heroes with chins large enough to qualify for their own zip codes, and heroines whose outfits seemed to have lost a battle with gravity. Yet, these lurid illustrations were effective. They screamed, "Buy me! I contain explosions, intrigue, and possibly a gorilla with a laser gun." By the 1950s, pulps began to fade, victims of their own rising paper costs and something called television. But their legacy lives on, proving that sometimes the cheapest paper can hold the richest stories and some of the most gloriously absurd plot twists. But let's move on to the stories. These magazines featured a variety of genres. They were known for their sensational and fast-paced storytelling. One of the notable mags of the time was Amazing Science Fiction Stories, which would eventually become just Amazing Stories. Our first story comes from there, and it is titled Test Rocket. It was first published in April of 1959. It's a story of man's first attempt to discover what's out there. Now, I hope you don't mind, but this one is going to be read by me. Captain Beard stood at the window of the laboratory where the 1,000 parts of a strange rocket lay strewn in careful order. Small groups worked slowly over the dismantled parts. The captain wanted to ask, but something stopped him. Behind him, Dr. Johansen sat at his desk, his gnarled old hand tight about a whiskey bottle. The bottle the doctor had always kept, but never brought out except when he was alone. He waited for Captain Beard to ask his question. Captain Beard turned at last. "There are markings?" he asked. It was not a question. Captain Beard knew the markings of the rocket testing station as well as the doctor did. "Yes," the doctor said. "There are markings, identical, but not our paint." Captain Beard turned back to the window. 6 months ago it happened. 10 minutes after launching, the giant test rocket had only been a speck on the observation screen. Captain Beard had turned away in disgust. "A mouse," the captain had said. "Unfortunate. A mouse can't observe, build, report." "My men are getting restless, Johansen." "When we're ready, Captain," the doctor had said. It was 12 hours before the urgent call from Central Control brought the captain running back to the laboratory. The doctor was there before him. Professor Schultz wasted no time. He pointed to the instrument panel. "Sudden shift. See for yourself. We'll miss Mars by 1.25 million, at least." 2 hours later, the shift in course of the test rocket was apparent to all of them, and so was their disappointment. "According to the instruments, the steering shifted 1/4 of an inch. No reason shows up," Professor Schultz said. "Flaw in the metal?" Dr. Johansen said. "How far will it go?" Captain Beard asked. Professor Schultz shrugged. "Until the fuel runs out, which is probably as good as never, or the landing mechanism is activated by a planet-sized body." "Of course. Did you plot it?" the doctor asked. "Of course I did," Professor Schultz said. "As close as I can calculate it, it's headed for Alpha Centauri." Captain Beard turned away. The doctor watched him. "Perhaps, Captain, you'll not be so hasty with your men's lives in the future," the doctor said. Professor Schultz sat, spinning dials. "No contact," the professor said. "No contact at all." That had been 6 months ago. 3 more test rockets had been fired successfully before the urgent report came through from Alaskan Observation Post number 4. A rocket was coming across the pole. The strange rocket was tracked and escorted by fighter jets all the way to the rocket testing station, where it cut its own motors and gently landed in the center of a division of atomic-armed infantry. The captain, the doctor, and everyone else waited impatiently. "You sure it's not ours?" Captain Beard asked. The doctor laughed. "Identical, yes, but 3 times the size of ours. Perhaps one of the Asian ones." "No, it's our design, but too large. Much too large." Professor Schultz put their thoughts into words. "Looks like someone copied ours. Someone, somewhere. It's hard to imagine, but true, nevertheless." They waited 2 weeks. Nothing happened. Then a radiation shield team went in to examine the rocket. 2 more weeks, and the strange rocket was dismantled and spread over the field of the testing station. The rocket was dismantled, and the station had begun to talk to itself in whispers, and looked at the sky. Captain Beard now stood at the window and looked out at the dismantled rocket. He looked, but his mind was not on the parts of the rocket he could see from the window. "The materials, they're not ours?" the captain asked. "Unknown here," the doctor said. The captain nodded. Those were our instruments." "Yes." The doctor still held the whiskey bottle in a tight grasp. "They sent them back?" the captain asked. The doctor crashed the bottle hard against the desktop. "Ask it, Captain. For God's sake, ask it." The captain turned to face the doctor directly. "It was a man. A full-grown man?" The doctor sighed as if letting the pent-up steam of his heart escape. "Yes, it's a man. It breathes. It eats. It has all the attributes of a man, but it's not of our planet." "It's speech," the captain began. "That isn't speech, Captain. It's only sound." The doctor stopped. He examined the label of his bottle of whiskey very carefully. A good brand of whiskey. "He seems quite happy in the storeroom, you know, Captain, which puzzled me at first. He can't read anything, not even the instruments in that ship. In fact, he shows no interest in this rocket at all." The captain sat down now. He sat at the desk and faced the doctor. "At least they had the courage to send a man, Doctor, not a mouse. A man." The doctor stared at the captain, his hands squeezing and unsqueezing the bottle again. "A man who can't read his own instruments," the doctor laughed. "Perhaps you've failed to see the point. Like that stupid general who sits out there waiting for men from somewhere. Don't you think it's a possibility?" The doctor nodded. "A very good possibility, Captain, but they'll not be men." The doctor seemed to pause and lean forward. "That rocket, Captain, is a test rocket. A test rocket just like ours." Then the doctor picked up his whiskey and at last poured 2 glasses. "Perhaps a drink, Captain?" The captain took the whiskey, but was watching the sky outside the window. There you have it. I think the reason I like this one so much is because of the open yet closed nature of the story. You have the what'll happen next, watching the skies for alien arrival, but there is an undertow of the story, that of the human-like copy in the basement with the intellect and actions of a mouse. But what does that mean? Well, to me, I can only think that these alien visitors will view humans much like we view the mouse. How about that? Our next story is also sci-fi, after a fashion. It comes from the magazine Analog Science Fiction, in fact. Originally titled Astounding Stories of Super Science, the first issue was dated January of 1930. Our story appeared in the April 1962 edition. By then, the magazine was simply known as Analog. In the 50s and 60s, innovation was a thing, and we had an explosion of gadgets to make our lives better. This next story looks at how a toy can introduce a power that can change everything. It is titled The Toy Shop, and it is read for us by Corey Samuels.
Toy Shop by Harry Harrison. Because there were few adults in the crowd, and Colonel Biff Horton stood over 6 feet tall, he could see every detail of the demonstration. The children, and most of the parents, gaped in wide-eyed wonder. Biff Horton was too sophisticated to be awed. He stayed on because he wanted to find out what the trick was that made the gadget work. "It's all explained right here in your instruction book," the demonstrator said, holding up a garishly printed booklet opened to a 4-color diagram. "You all know how magnets pick up things, and I bet you even know that the Earth itself is one great big magnet. That's why compasses always point north. Well, the Atomic Wonder Space Wave Tapper hangs on to those space waves. Invisibly, all about us, and even going right through us, are the magnetic waves of the Earth. The Atomic Wonder rides these waves, just the way a ship rides the waves in the ocean. Now watch." Every eye was on him as he put the gaudy model rocket ship on top of the table and stepped back. It was made of stamped metal, and seemed as incapable of flying as a can of ham, which it very much resembled. Neither wings, propellers, nor jets broke through the painted surface. It rested on 3 rubber wheels, and coming out through the bottom was a double strand of thin insulated wire. This white wire ran across the top of the black table and terminated in a control box in the demonstrator's hand. An indicator light, a switch, and a knob appeared to be the only controls. "I turn on the power switch, sending a surge of current to the wave receptors," he said. The switch clicked, and the light blinked on and off with a steady pulse. Then the man began to slowly turn the knob. "A careful touch on the wave generator is necessary, as we are dealing with the powers of the whole world here." A concerted "ah" swept through the crowd as the space wave tapper shivered a bit, then rose slowly into the air. The demonstrator stepped back, and the toy rose higher and higher, bobbing gently on the invisible waves of magnetic force that supported it. Ever so slowly, the power was reduced, and it settled back to the table. "Only $17.95, the young man said, putting a large price sign on the table. "For the complete set of the Atomic Wonder, the Space Tapper control box, battery, and instruction book." At the appearance of the price card, the crowd broke up noisily, and the children rushed away towards the operating model trains. The demonstrator's words were lost in their noisy passage, and after a moment he sank into a gloomy silence. He put the control box down, yawned, and sat on the edge of the table. Colonel Horton was the only one left after the crowd had moved on. "Could you tell me how this thing works?" the colonel asked, coming forward. The demonstrator brightened up and picked up one of the toys. "Well, if you will look here, sir." He opened the hinged top. "You will see the space wave coils at each end of the ship." With a pencil, he pointed out the odd-shaped plastic forms about an inch in diameter that had been wound, apparently at random, with a few turns of copper wire. Except for these coils, the interior of the model was empty. The coils were wired together, and other wires ran out through the hole in the bottom of the control box. Biff Horton turned a very quizzical eye on the gadget, and upon the demonstrator, who completely ignored this sign of disbelief. "Inside the control box is the battery," the young man said, snapping it open and pointing to an ordinary flashlight battery. "The current goes through the power switch and power light to the wave generator." "What you mean to say," Biff broke in, "is that the juice from this 15-cent battery goes through this cheap rheostat to those meaningless coils in the model and absolutely nothing happens. Now tell me what really flies the thing. If I'm going to drop $18 for 6 bits worth of tin, I want to know what I'm getting." The demonstrator flushed. "I'm sorry, sir," he stammered. "I wasn't trying to hide anything. Like any magic trick, this one can't really be demonstrated until it's been purchased." He leaned forward and whispered confidentially. "I'll tell you what I'll do, though. This thing is way overpriced and hasn't been moving at all. The manager said I could let them go at $3 if I could find any takers. If you want to buy it for that price—" "Sold, my boy," the colonel said, slamming 3 bills down on the table. "I'll give that much for it no matter how it works. The boys in the shop will get a kick out of it." He tapped the winged rocket on his chest. "Now, really, what holds it up?" The demonstrator looked round carefully, then pointed. "Strings," he said. "Or rather a black thread. It runs from the top of the model through a tiny loop in the ceiling and back down to my hand, tied to this ring on my finger. When I back up, the model rises. It's as simple as that." "All good illusions are simple," the colonel grunted, tracing the black thread with his eye, "as long as there is plenty of flim-flam to distract the viewer." "If you don't have a black table, a black cloth will do," the young man said. "And the arch of a doorway is a good sight. Just see that the room in back is dark." "Wrap it up, my boy. I wasn't born yesterday. I'm an old hand at this kind of thing." Biff Horton sprang it at the next Thursday night poker party. The gang were all missile men, and they cheered and jeered as he hammed up the introduction. "Let me copy the diagram, Biff. I could use some of those magnetic waves in the new bird. Those flashlight batteries are cheaper than locks. This is the thing of the future." Only Teddy Kaner caught wise as the flight began. He was an amateur magician and spotted the gimmick at once. He kept silent with professional courtesy and smiled ironically as the rest of the bunch grew silent one by one. The Colonel was a good showman, and he had set the scene well. He almost had them believing in the space wave tapper before he was through. When the model had landed and he had switched it off, he couldn't stop them from crowding around the table. "A thread!" one of the engineers shouted, almost with relief, and they all laughed along with him. "Too bad," the head project physicist said. "I was hoping that a little space wave tapping could help us out. Let me try a flight with it." "Teddy Kaner first," Biff announced. "He spotted it while you were all watching the flashing lights, only he didn't say anything." Kaner slipped the ring with the black thread over his finger and started to step back. "You have to turn the switch on first," Biff said. "I know," Kaner smiled, "but that's part of illusion, the spiel and the misdirection. I'm going to try this cold first, so I can get it moving up and down smoothly, then go through it with the whole works." He moved his hand back smoothly, in a professional manner that drew no attention to it. The model lifted from the table, then crashed back down. "The thread broke," Kaner said. "You jerked it instead of pulling smoothly," Biff said, and knotted the broken thread. "Here, let me show you how to do it." The thread broke again when Biff tried it, which got a good laugh that made his collar a little warm. Someone mentioned the poker game. This was the only time that poker was mentioned, or even remembered that night, because very soon after this, they found that the thread would lift the model only when the switch was on, and 2.5 volts flowing through the joke coils. With the current turned off, the model was too heavy to lift. The thread broke every time. "I still think it's a screwy idea," the young man said. 1 week getting fallen arches, demonstrating those toy ships for every brat within 1,000 miles, then selling the things for $3 when they must have cost at least $100 a piece to make." "But you did sell the 10 of them to people who would be interested?" the older man asked. "I think so. I caught a few Air Force officers and a colonel in missiles one day. Then there was one official I remembered from the Bureau of Standards. Luckily he didn't recognize me. Then those 2 professors you spotted from the university." "Then the problem is out of our hands and into theirs. All we have to do now is sit back and wait for results." "What results? These people weren't interested when we were hammering on their doors with the proof. We've patented the coils and can prove to anyone that there is a reduction in weight around them when they are operating." "But a small reduction, and we don't know what is causing it. No one can be interested in a thing like that, a fractional weight decrease in a clumsy model, certainly not enough to lift the weight of the generator. No one wrapped up in massive fuel consumption, tons of lift and such, is going to have time to worry about a crackpot who thinks he has found a minor slip in Newton's laws." "You think they will now?" the young man asked, cracking his knuckles impatiently. "I know they will. The tensile strength of that thread is correctly adjusted to the weight of the model. The thread will break if you try to lift the model with it. Yet you can lift the model after a small increment of its weight has been removed by the coils. This is going to bug these men. Nobody is going to ask them to solve the problem or concern themselves with it. But it will nag at them because they know this effect can't possibly exist. They'll see at once that the magnetic wave theory is nonsense. Or perhaps true, we don't know. But they will all be thinking about it and worrying about it. Someone is going to experiment in his basement, just as a hobby, of course, to find the cause of the error. And he, or someone else, is going to find out what makes those coils work, or maybe a way to improve them. And we have the patents." "Correct. They will be doing the research that will take them out of the massive lift propulsion business and into the field of pure spaceflight. And in doing so, they will be making us rich, whenever the time comes to manufacture, the young man said cynically. We'll all be rich, son, the older man said, patting him on the shoulder. Believe me, you're not going to recognize this old world 10 years from now.
The Toy Shop was written by one of my favorite authors, Harry Harrison, of the stainless steel rat fame. He was a great storyteller. But did you know that it had some fact to it? But in the reverse. An idea came to naval engineer Richard James while trying to develop a spring that would support and stabilize sensitive equipment on ships. While he was working on his project, one of the springs fell off the shelf and kept moving. As James watched the spring continue to move, a light bulb went off in his head. He decided that it would make a great toy, and his wife came up with the name, the Slinky. It was first sold in late 1945. This next tale is from a dystopian society that I hope never comes to pass. It is titled 2BR02B, but it's pronounced 2BR not to be. It is a science fiction story written by Kurt Vonnegut, originally published in If, Worlds of Science Fiction in January of 1962. It is read for us by Anthony Wood.
To be are not to be by Kurt Vonnegut. Everything was perfectly swell. There were no prisons, no slums, no insane asylums, no cripples, no poverty, no wars. All diseases were conquered, so was old age. Death, barring accidents, was an adventure for volunteers. The population of the United States was stabilized at 40 million souls. One bright morning in the Chicago Lying-In Hospital, a man named Edward K. Welling, Jr. waited for his wife to give birth. He was the only man waiting. Not many people were born a day anymore. Welling was 56, a mere stripling in a population whose average age was 129. X-rays had revealed that his wife was going to have triplets. The children would be his first. Young Welling was hunched in his chair, his head in his hand. He was so rumpled, so still and colorless as to be virtually invisible. His camouflage was perfect, since the waiting room had a disorderly and demoralized air, too. Chairs and ashtrays had been moved away from the walls. The floor was paved with spattered drop cloths. The room was being redecorated. It was being redecorated as a memorial to a man who had volunteered to die. A sardonic old man, about 200 years old, sat on a stepladder, painting a mural he did not like. Back in the days when people aged visibly, his age would have been guessed at 35 or so. Aging had touched him that much before the cure for aging was found. The mural he was working on depicted a very neat garden. Men and women in white, doctors and nurses, turned the soil, planted seedlings, sprayed bugs, spread fertilizer. Men and women in purple uniforms pulled up weeds, cut down plants that were old and sickly, raked leaves, carried refuse to trash burners. Never, 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 not even in medieval Holland nor old Japan, had a garden been more formal, been better tended. Every plant had all the loam, light, water, air, and nourishment it could use. A hospital orderly came down the corridor, singing under his breath a popular song. If you don't like my kisses, honey, here is what I'll do. I'll go and see a girl in purple, kiss this sad world toodaloo. If you don't want my lovin', why should I take up all this space? I'll get off this old planet. Let some sweet baby have my place. The orderly looked at the mural and the muralist. Looks so real, he said. I can practically imagine I'm standing in the middle of it. What makes you think you're not in it? Said the painter. He gave a satiric smile. It's called the happy garden of life, you know. That's good of Dr. Hitz, said the orderly. He was referring to one of the male figures in white, whose head was a portrait of Dr. Benjamin Hitz, the hospital's chief obstetrician. Hitz was a blindingly handsome man. Lots of faces still to fill in, said the orderly. He meant that the faces of many of the figures in the mural were still blank. All blanks were to be filled with portraits of important people on either the hospital staff or from the Chicago office of the Federal Bureau of Termination. Must be nice to be able to make pictures that look like something, said the orderly. The painter's face curdled with scorn. You think I'm proud of this daub? He said. You think this is my idea of what life really looks like? What's your idea of what life looks like? Said the orderly. The painter gestured at a foul drop cloth. There's a good picture of it, he said. Frame that. You'll have a picture a damn sight more honest than this one. You're a gloomy old duck, aren't you? Said the orderly. Is that a crime? Said the painter. The orderly shrugged. If you don't like it here, Grandpa, he said, and he finished the thought with the trick telephone number that people who didn't want to live anymore were supposed to call. The 0 in the telephone number was pronounced naught. The number was, to be are not to be. It was the telephone number of an institution whose fanciful sobriquets included Automat, Birdland, Cannery, Catbox, Delouser, Easy Go, Good Mother, Happy Hooligan, Kiss Me Quick, Lucky Pierre, Sheep Dip, Wearing Blender, Weep No More, and Why Worry? To be or not to be was the telephone number of the municipal gas chambers of the Federal Bureau of Termination. The painter thumbed his nose at the orderly. When I decide it's time to go, he said, it won't be at the Sheep Dip. A do-it-yourselfer, eh? Said the orderly. Messy business, Grandpa. Why don't you have a little consideration for the people who have to clean up after you? The painter expressed with an obscenity his lack of concern for the tribulations of his survivors. The world could do with a good deal more mess, if you ask me, he said. The orderly laughed and moved on. Wailing, the waiting father, mumbled something without raising his head and then fell silent again. A coarse, formidable woman strode into the waiting room on spiked heels. Her shoes, stockings, trench coat, bag, and overseas cap were all purple, the purple the painter called the color of grapes on Judgment Day. The medallion on her purple musette bag was the seal of the Service Division of the Federal Bureau of Termination, an eagle perched on a turnstile. The woman had a lot of facial hair, an unmistakable mustache, in fact. A curious thing about gas chamber hostesses was that no matter how lovely and feminine they were when recruited, they all sprouted mustaches within 5 years or so. Is this where I'm supposed to come? She said to the painter. A lot would depend on what your business was, he said. You aren't about to have a baby, are you? They told me I was supposed to pose for some picture, she said. My name's Leora Duncan. She waited. And you dunk people, he said. What? Skip it. That sure is a beautiful picture, she said. Looks like a heaven or something. Or something, said the painter. He took a list of names from his smock pocket. Duncan, 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 he said, scanning the list. Yes, here you are. You're entitled to be immortalized. See any faceless body here you'd like me to stick your head on? We got a few choice ones left. She studied the mural bleakly. Gee, she said, they're all the same to me. I don't know anything about art. A body's a body, huh? He said. All righty. As a master of fine art, I recommend this body here. He indicated a faceless figure of a woman who was carrying dried stalks to a trash burner. Well, said Leora Duncan, that's more the disposal people, isn't it? I mean, I'm in service. I don't do any disposing. The painter clapped his hands in mock delight. You say you don't know anything about art, and then you prove in the next breath that you know more about it than I do. Of course the sheep carrier is wrong for a hostess. A snipper, a pruner, that's more your line. He pointed to a figure in purple who was sawing a dead branch from an apple tree. How about her? He said. You like her at all? Gosh, she said, and she blushed and became humble. That puts me right next to Dr. Hitz. That upsets you? He said. Oh, good gravy, no, she said. It's just such an honor. Ah, you admire him, huh? He said. Who doesn't admire him? She said, worshipping the portrait of Hitz. It was the portrait of a tanned, white-haired, omnipotent Zeus, 240 years old. Who doesn't admire him? She said again. He was responsible for setting up the very first gas chamber in Chicago. Nothing would please me more, said the painter, than to put you next to him for all time, sawing off a limb. That strikes you as appropriate? That is kind of like what I do, she said. She was demure about what she did. What she did was make people comfortable when she killed them. And while Leora Duncan was posing for her portrait, into the waiting room bounded Dr. Hitz himself. He was 7 feet tall, and he boomed with importance, accomplishments, and the joy of living. Well, Miss Duncan, he said, and he made a joke. What are you doing here? He said. This isn't where the people leave. This is where they come in. We're going to be in the same picture together, she said shyly. Good, said Dr. Hitz heartily. And say, isn't that some picture? I sure am honored to be in it with you, she said. Well, let me tell you, he said, I'm honored to be in it with you. Without women like you, this wonderful world we've got wouldn't be possible. He saluted her and moved toward the door that led to the delivery rooms. Guess what was just born, he said. I can't, she said. Triplets, he said. Triplets? She was exclaiming over the legal implications of triplets. The law said that no newborn child could survive unless the parents of the child could find someone who would volunteer to die. Triplets, if they were all to live, called for 3 volunteers. Do the parents have 3 volunteers? Said Leora Duncan. Last I heard, said Dr. Hitz, they had 1, and were trying to scrape another 2 up. I don't think they made it, she said. Nobody made 3 appointments with us. Nothing but singles going through today, unless somebody called in after I left. What's the name? Welling, said the waiting father, sitting up red-eyed and frowsy. Edward K. Welling, Jr. is the name of the happy father-to-be. He raised his right hand, looked at the spot on the wall, gave a hoarsely wretched chuckle. Present, he said. Oh, Mr. Welling, said Dr. Hitz. I didn't see you. The invisible man, said Welling. They just phoned me that your triplets had been born, said Dr. Hitz. They're all fine, and so is the mother. I'm on my way to see them now. Hooray, said Welling emptily. You don't sound very happy, said Dr. Hitz. What man in my shoes wouldn't be happy, said Welling. He gestured with his hands to symbolize carefree simplicity. All I have to do is pick out which one of the triplets is going to live, then deliver my maternal grandfather to the happy hooligan, and come back here with a receipt. Dr. Hitz became rather severe with Welling, towered over him. You don't believe in population control, Mr. Welling, he said. I think it's perfectly keen, said Welling tautly. Would you like to go back to the good old days, when the population of the earth was 20 billion, about to become 40 billion, then 80 billion, then 160 billion? Do you know what a druplet is, Mr. Welling? Said Hitz. Nope, said Welling sulkily. A druplet, Mr. Welling, is one of the little knobs, one of the little pulpy grains of a blackberry. Without population control, human beings would now be packed on the surface of this old planet like druplets on a blackberry. Think of it. Welling continued to stare at the same spot on the wall. In the year 2000, said Dr. Hitz, before scientists stepped in and laid down the law, there wasn't even enough drinking water to go around, and nothing to eat but seaweed. And still, people insisted on their right to reproduce like jackrabbits, and their right, if possible, to live forever. I want those kids, said Welling quietly. I want all 3 of them. Of course you do, said Dr. Hitz. That's only human. I don't want my grandfather to die either, said Welling. Nobody's really happy about taking a close relative to the cat box, said Dr. Hitz gently, sympathetically. I wish people wouldn't call it that, said Leora Duncan. What? Said Dr. Hitz. I wish people wouldn't call it the cat box and things like that. It gives people the wrong impression. You're absolutely right, said Dr. Hitz. Forgive me. He corrected himself, gave the municipal gas chambers their official title, a title no one ever used in conversation. I should have said the Ethical Suicide Studios. That sounds so much better, said Leora Duncan. "This child of yours, whichever one you decide to keep, Mr. Welling," said Dr. Hitz, "he or she is going to live on a happy, roomy, clean, rich planet thanks to population control. In a garden like that mural there." He shook his head. "2 centuries ago, when I was a young man, it was a hell that nobody thought could last another 20 years. Now centuries of peace and plenty stretch before us as far as the imagination cares to travel." He smiled luminously. The smile faded as he saw that Welling had just drawn a revolver. Welling shot Dr. Hitz dead. "There's room for one, a great big one," he said. And then he shot Leora Duncan. "It's only death," he said to her as she fell. "There, room for 2. And then he shot himself, making room for all 3 of his children. Nobody came running. Nobody seemingly heard the shots. The painter sat on top of his stepladder, looking down reflectively on the sorry scene. The painter pondered the mournful puzzle of life, demanding to be born, and once born, demanding to be fruitful, to multiply and to live as long as possible, to do all that on a very small planet that would have to last forever. All the answers that the painter could think of were grim. Even grimmer, surely, than a cat box, a happy hooligan, an easy go. He thought of war. He thought of plague. He thought of starvation. He knew that he would never paint again. He let his paintbrush fall to the drop cloths below. And then he decided he had had about enough of life in the happy garden of life, too. And he came slowly down the ladder. He took Welling's pistol, really intending to shoot himself. But he didn't have the nerve. And then he saw the telephone booth in the corner of the room. He went to it, dialed the well-remembered number, 2B are not 2B.
"Federal Bureau of Termination,"
said a very warm voice of a hostess. "How soon can I get an appointment?" he asked, speaking very carefully.
"We could probably fit you in late this afternoon, sir,"
she said.
"It might even be earlier if we get a cancellation."
"All right," said the painter. "Fit me in, if you please." And he gave her his name, spelling it out.
"Thank you, sir,"
said the hostess.
"Your city thanks you, your country thanks you, your planet thanks you. But the deepest thanks of all is from future generations."
The end of To Be Are Not To Be by Kurt Vonnegut. To Be or Not To Be was first published in If Worlds of Science Fiction. It was later included in Vonnegut's 1999 collection of Bangumbo Snuffbox. The story has been widely reprinted and often is included in anthologies of classic science fiction. However, it never won any awards, but perhaps it should have. Our last story is my favorite of the bunch. It is again science fiction, but this one is really out there. Some say that it was the inspiration for the 1985 film, The Explorers. I'm going to leave that one up for you to decide. The story is titled, We Didn't Do Anything Wrong. Hardly. And it was first published in Astounding Science Fiction in May of 1959. It is read for us by Fatima.
We Didn't Do Anything Wrong. Hardly. By Roger Kirkendall. After all, they only borrowed it a little while, just to fix it. I mean, it isn't like we swiped anything. We maybe borrowed a couple of things but gee, we put everything back like we found it, pretty near. Even like the compressor we got from Stinky Brinker that his old man wasn't using, and I traded my outboard motor for. My father made me trade back. But it was like Skinny said. You know, Skinny Thompson. He's the one you guys keep calling the boy genius. But shucks, he's no... Well, yeah, it's like Skinny said. We didn't need an outboard motor, and we did need a compressor. You've got to have a compressor on a spaceship. Everybody knows that. And that old compression chamber that old man, Mr. Fields, let us use didn't have a compressor. Sure, he said we could use it, Anyway, he said we could play with it, and Skinny said we were going to make a spaceship out of it, and he said go ahead. Well, no, he didn't say it exactly like that. I mean, well, like he didn't take it serious, sort of. Anyway, it made a swell spaceship. It had 4 portholes on it, and an airlock, and real bunks in it, and lots of room for all that stuff that Skinny put in there. But it didn't have a compressor, and that's why... What stuff? Oh, you know, the stuff that Skinny put in there. Like the radar he made out of a TV set, and the anti-gravity, and the atomic power plant he invented to run it all with. He's awful smart, Skinny is, but he's not like what you think of a genius. You know, he's not all the time using big words, and he doesn't look like a genius. I mean, we call him Skinny 'cause he used to be skinny. But he isn't now. I mean, he's maybe small for his age. Anyway, he's smaller than me, and I'm the same age as he is. 'Cause I'm big for my age, so that doesn't mean much, does it? Well, I guess Stinky Brinker started it. He's always writing Skinny about one thing or another, but Skinny never gets mad, and it's a good thing for Stinker too. I saw Skinny clean up on a bunch of 9th graders. Well, a couple of them anyway. They were saying... Well, I guess I won't tell you what they were saying. Anyway, Skinny used judo, I guess, because there wasn't much of a fight. Anyway, Stinker said something about how he was going to be a rocket pilot when he grew up, and I told him that Skinny had told me that there wouldn't be any rockets, and that anti-gravity would be the thing as soon as it was invented. So Stinker said it never would be invented, and I said it would so, and he said it would not, and I said... Well, if you're going to keep interrupting me, how can I... All right. Anyway, Skinny broke into the argument and said that he could prove mathematically that anti-gravity was possible. And Stinky said, sure he could. And Skinny said, sure he could. And Stinky said, sure he could. Like that. Honestly, is there any way to argue? I mean, it sounds like 2 people agreeing, only Stinky keeps going, sure, like that, you know? And Stinky, what does he know about mathematics? He's had to take remedial arithmetic ever since. No, I don't understand how the anti-gravity works. Skinny told me, but it was something about meson flow and stuff like that I didn't understand. The atomic power plant made more sense. Where did we get what uranium? Gee, no, we couldn't afford uranium, so Skinny invented a hydrogen fusion plant. Anyone can make hydrogen. You just take zinc and sulfuric acid and... Deuterium? You mean like heavy hydrogen? No, Skinny said it would probably work better, but like I said, we couldn't afford anything fancy. As it was, Skinny had to pay $5 or $6 for that special square tubing in the anti-gravity, and the plastic space helmets we had cost us 98 cents each. And it cost $1.50 for the special tube that Skinny needed to make the TV set into a radar. You see, we didn't steal anything really. It was mostly stuff that was just lying around. Like the TV set was up in my attic, and the old refrigerator that Skinny used the parts to make the atomic power plant out of from. And then, a lot of the stuff we already had. Like the skin diving suits we made into spacesuits, and the vacuum pump that Skinny had already, and the generator. Sure, we did a lot of skin diving, but that was last summer. That's how we knew about Old Man Brinker's compressor that Stinky said was his, and I traded my outboard motor for and had to trade back. And that's how we knew about Mr. Feude's old compression chamber, and all like that. The rocket? Well, it works on the same principle as the atomic power plant, only it doesn't work except in a vacuum. Hardly. 'Cause you don't need much of a rocket when you have anti-gravity. Everyone knows that. Well, anyway, that's how we built the spaceship, and believe me, it wasn't easy. I mean, with Stinky all the time bothering us and laughing at us. And I had to do a lot of lawn mowing to get money for the square tubing for the anti-gravity, and the special tube for the radar, and my space helmet. Stinky called the space helmet kid stuff. He was always saying things like, "Say hello to the folks on Mars for me," and "Bring back a bottle of Canal number 5, and all like that, you know. 'Cause they did look like kid stuff, I guess. We bought them at the 5 and dime, and they were meant for kids. Of course, when Skinny got through with them, they worked fine. We tested them in the airlock of the compression chamber when we got the compressor in. They tested out pretty good for a half hour, then we tried them on in there. Well, it wasn't a complete vacuum, just 27 inches of mercury, but that was okay for a test. So anyway, we got ready to take off. Stinky was there to watch, of course. He was saying things like, "Farewell, O brave pioneers," and stuff like that. I mean, it was enough to make you sick. He was standing there laughing and singing something like, "Up in the air, Junior Birdman." But when we closed the airlock door, we couldn't hear him. Skinny started up the atomic power plant, and we could see Stinky laughing fit to kill. It takes a couple of minutes for it to warm up, you know. So Stinky started throwing rocks to attract our attention, and Skinny was scared that he'd crack a porthole or something, so he threw the switch and we took off. Boy, you should have seen Stinky's face. I mean, you really should have seen it. One minute he was laughing, you know, and the next minute he looked like a goldfish. I guess he always did look like a goldfish, but I mean even more like then. And he was getting smaller and smaller because we had taken off. We were gone pretty near 6 hours, and it's a good thing my mom made me take a lunch. Sure, I told her where we were going. Well, anyway, I told her we were maybe going to fly around the world in Skinny and my spaceship, or maybe go down to Carson's Pond. And she made me take a lunch and made me promise I wouldn't go swimming alone, and I sure didn't. But we did go around the world 3 or 4 times. I lost count. Anyway, that's when we saw the satellite on radar. So Skinny pulled the spaceship over to it, and we got out and looked at it. The spacesuit worked fine too. Gosh, no, we didn't steal it or anything. Like Skinny said, it was just a menace to navigation, and the batteries were dead, and it wasn't working right anyway. So we tied it onto the spaceship and took it home. No, we had to tie it on top. It was too big to take inside with the antennas sticking out. 'Course, we found out how to fold them later. Well, anyway, the next day, the Russians started squawking about a capitalist plot, and someone had swiped their satellite. Gee, I mean, with all the satellites up there, who'd miss just one? So I got worried that they'd find out that we took it. 'Course, I didn't need to worry because Stinky told them all right, just like a tattletale. So anyway, after Skinny got the batteries recharged, we put it back. And then when we landed, there were hundreds of people standing around, and Mr. Anderson from the State Department. I guess you know the rest. Except maybe Mr. Anderson started laughing when we told him, and he said it was the best joke on the Russians he ever heard. I guess it is when you think about it. I mean, the Russians complaining about somebody swiping the satellite, and then the State Department answering a couple of kids borrowed it, but they put it back. One thing that bothers me, though, we didn't put it back exactly the way we found it. But I guess it doesn't matter. You see, when we put it back, we goofed a little. I mean, we put it back in the same orbit, more or less, but we got it going in the wrong direction.
I loved that story, and I bet now you can see the similar nature of it to The Explorers. If you're not familiar with that movie, it's where 3 boys build a homemade spaceship inspired by alien dreams and travel into space. It starred a young River Phoenix and Ethan Hawke. It is a great film, and I highly recommend it if you haven't seen it. Well, I want to thank you for joining me on this journey through the wild, whimsical, and wonderfully absurd world of pulp magazines. We've explored tales that have stretched the imagination, ventured into the unknown, and reflected on the eccentric creativity that defined an era. From test rockets reaching to the stars, to toys with unexpected powers, dystopian dilemmas, and interstellar adventures, these stories continue to entertain and inspire. Pulp magazines have faded from the shelves, but their influence lives on in our books, movies, and perhaps most importantly, in our imaginations. They remind us that even the cheapest paper can have the richest ideas. Until next time, keep your curiosity alive, your mind open, and never underestimate the power of an amazing story. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you on our next adventure.
Not so many years ago, tomato soup and cream of tomato were unusual dishes, enjoyed very much, but not very often. Today, of all the soups in the world, tomato soup is the one most often served. Not because women have taken to making tomato soup frequently. No, on the contrary, few housewives ever attempt it anymore. There's just one reason for tomato soup's popularity, and it is this: the magic, matchless flavor of Campbell's tomato soup. There's a lively verve, a dashing zest about this flavor that people take to at once and come back to and enjoy again and again. The first racy taste of it has a way of arousing a desire to eat, and yet there's a pleasant feeling of satisfaction when the last spoonful is gone. So this soup is a happy choice for the main dish at lunchtime or at supper, and it also is a fine way to start the day's main meal. Serve it sometimes, too, as cream of tomato, made with milk instead of water. You can always be sure that it will be received with pleasure, because this, of all soups, is the one people like to have most often: Campbell's tomato soup.
Ron's Amazing Stories is brought to you by Audible. Discover endless adventures and a 30-day free trial today. You can stream or download thousands of included audiobooks, podcasts, and Audible originals in the Plus catalog. It gives you the power of storytelling anytime, anywhere. Visit audibletrial.com/Ron's Amazing Stories to start your journey today. Thank you, Audible.
This is the Autolite Suspense Show signing off. Good night.
That was episode number 687, and I hope that you enjoyed the show. If there are stories that you want to hear or tell, please send me a note. Head to ronsamazingstories.com and click on the Contact tab. I would love to hear from you. If you want to follow the podcast or the blog, head to ronsamazingstories.com. There you will find any of the links I mentioned and how to contact us. Do you want to help the show? The best thing you can do is to tell your friends all about it, and please leave reviews or feedback wherever you listen. Clicking that follow or like button helps us grow. Thank you for listening, and I hope you come again to find out what are Ron's Amazing Stories.
All of the vintage audio used in the podcast is believed to be in the public domain. Ron's Amazing Stories does not own the rights to any of the old-time radio used here. If you hold the rights to any of the shows played, please contact us immediately at ronsamazingstories.com.
Free audio post-production by alphonic.com.